Greetings and welcome to the Richard Dolan Show, where every week we fight the good fight. Very glad to be here with you this week. I have a guest. I'm very excited about this journalist whose work I have admired for some time now. Let me bring him on. He is, almost took him out of the studio. There you are, Christopher Sharp of the Liberation Times. Sorry about that, Chris. I almost actually kicked you out of the studio. Shows how proficient I am. Are you muted? Oh, no, you're not.
No. I was just going to say it's such an honor to be here after years watching your show. I can't believe my face is quite here next to yours. So it's a true honor to be on your
All right. Well, we're going to have to stop this
show,
mutual
so
admiration club because you're quite welcome. I admire your work very much as well. And before we get started, I want to give a shout out to a colleague of yours and someone that I also know and respect very much. We'll have to have him on, and that's Josh Boswell. In fact, before we even jump in, I just want people to see this is the latest article that you have done. We're going to be talking about that. This is on the failure of the latest UAP disclosure iteration, the UAP Disclosure Act. But also you and Josh did this article, which I think is a very important one. I've discussed this. I've talked about this with both of you privately on a UFO UAP retrieval program. You wrote about that last November. And then you and Josh have done a couple of other articles earlier this year. One on a very interesting USO aspect to the Nimitz encounter of 2004. And an interview with paratrooper Frank Milburn of the UK, who had some interesting things to say about UFO crash retrievals. And we'll see how much of those we can get into. But I'm very interested in discussing the latest article that you've put together. It's made a bit of a splash. It's very important. And it's something I talked about a week ago on this channel, and a lot of other people have followed up after your article to talk about it, just relating to the failure for the second year in a row for the UAP Disclosure Act to be included in any meaningful legislation. So can you tell listeners about this legislation and why it failed again, and maybe the nature of how you were able to research this story?
Yes. So the UAP Disclosure Act was initially proposed by both Senators Mike Rounds, a Republican, and Senator Chuck Schumer, obviously the majority leader of the Senate. From my understanding, it originated with coordination from Jake Sullivan, who's the National Security Advisor for Joe Biden. And it was very, very important, for someone of this stature, Chuck Schumer, to come out with this explosively as well, releasing a press release on the Democrat Senate site announcing it. It was huge news, and it referred to non-human origin multiple times in the legislation, and it looked to really, really add teeth to what Congress could do in terms of getting the information out there, so that they could have transparency over an intelligence community and a Department of Defense, which seems to have gone rogue. So you had things like a UAP a review board, an independently appointed review board, actually appointed by the president, composed of 9 members, who would basically go through documentation that had to be released by all these government agencies to actually find out the truth of what's been going on in terms of these alleged rogue programs. And if they did end up finding biologics or craft, then there would be the option to use eminent domain, whereby that becomes the possession of the government, especially if it's with contractors such as Lockheed Martin, Raytheon. So it was really, really historic. And unfortunately, it got gutted from the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2024. So that happened last year. And that was due to opposition, allegedly, from the House, mostly Representative Mike Turner, who is the chair of the House's Intelligence Committee. Allegations also suggested that there was coordination with Senator McConnell, the minority leader of the Senate, the Armed Services Committee in the House, Mike Rogers, and other senators and congressmen as well. So, people will argue all night and all day over whose fault it was last time. We'll never know for sure, because Mike Turner basically has said on record that he wasn't to blame for holding up the legislation in the first place. But, it basically got gutted last year. The teeth got taken out of the legislation. So then this year it got reintroduced again for the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2025, which is due to be passed by President Biden, which I think would be his kind of like last big act in office.
Mm-hmm.
And so it got brought back by Mike Rounds and Chuck Schumer again, with support from Kirsten Gillibrand and a bunch of other senators. It was a bipartisan issue as well. It had bipartisan support, and there was lots of lobbying that happened. You had the UAP Disclosure Fund, the New Paradigm Institute, which is led by Danny Sheehan, and some other groups as well that were heavily lobbying senators to actually get this through. But unfortunately, it never made it through. It was an amendment, and it would have had to be chosen to fit within the existing proposed National Defense Authorization Act from the Senate, which would go into something called a manager's pack, where they would choose all the amendments that would be carried over to that main bit of legislation proposed by the Senate, and then that would go over to negotiations with the House. But unfortunately, it never made it that far. Now, there is a suggestion that it could be airdropped into negotiations with the House. Those negotiations, by the way, are supposed to occur after the elections in the US. So there is a glimmer of hope, and Mike Rounds has gone on record saying that this isn't over yet. So there is a glimmer of hope, but I mean, from people I've spoken to, it's very, very unlikely that we'll see this pass the line. The best we could hope for, from my understanding, is that we could get small snippets of that legislation passed through. But otherwise, it might be a step too far, because we've got no indications yet that the likes of Mike Turner and Mike Rogers within the House, if indeed they did oppose the legislation last year, we've got no expectation that they've actually changed their tune and they would actually agree to any parts of this legislation going through whatsoever if airdropped into those negotiations. And then plus we've got allegations as well that Rand Paul was involved, although his team have denied that on record to me. And then the latest one is again, so we've got that name again. We've got Senator McConnell again, that's been alleged, Mitch McConnell, to have actually played a part in this. I contacted his team for comment. They won't comment, unfortunately. I've tried again and again, and they just won't say anything. I think it's one of those scenarios. It's kind of like last year. I think you're either going to get a case where the representatives and the senators are going to not comment or just deny they had anything to do with it. But the end result may be the same. Once again, transparency has been thwarted. And unfortunately, it seems that the Congress does not want transparency, and it doesn't want to hold, a rogue intelligence community and defense department accountable, which is really, really unfortunate, especially, for the public in America.
What's interesting about this? Thank you, by the way, for that explication of the process. I'm not an expert on congressional legislation. I can't say that I follow the passage of legislation on a regular basis. I almost never do. But it seems strange to me that we cannot really get confirmation of who are the members of Congress who are most actively opposing this. they don't seem to want to go on record. Isn't it strange? Because I suspect they know this is actually would be popular legislation. I suspect if most individuals, most American citizens were to be asked about this and asked, would you support a UAP Transparency Act in legislation? They would probably say yes. And so I suspect these members of Congress know this, and they don't really want to make a huge public stand against it, like they would on so many other issues where they can get political points. This seems to be one of those actual deep state machinations working behind the scene through members of Congress to prevent this legislation from going through. Does that seem off base to you, or does that seem like it's possibly the case?
I think it's the case, definitely. I mean, Mike Turner will only go as far as to say that, you know, I don't think this is good legislation. I think it's really badly worded. I think he said that on record before, and then he denied holding it up. But that's as far as I think he'll go. I can say that, let's say sources close to Mike Rogers' office have actually said, look, it had nothing to do with Mike. It was the other Mike Turner, who opposed it all. That was quite funny as well, seeing how that happened. But yeah, I mean, we can't forget that, you know, both of the Mikes have had lots and lots of support from defense contractors. They seem very, very close to the intelligence community as well.
Well, one of them is based out of near Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, and the other is based down by Huntsville, Alabama. So those are both obviously major connections to the defense community.
Absolutely. And one of Mike Turner's staff, one of his former staffers, we discovered, now works for Lockheed Martin. I think he's got a lobbyist role, if I can remember right. We reported it last year, which we thought was a really, really interesting connection there. But look, yeah, I mean, there's obviously the donations. A lot of these members in Congress are heavily supported by the defense contractors. We've also kind of got the Defense Department as well, lobbying against this legislation. It came out recently that the former ARRI director, Sean Kirkpatrick, was actually lobbying against the UAPDA. I think he was saying that the review board would basically would make ARRI basically redundant in terms of what they're doing. And then I think there's another aspect to it as well. I think that there are some members of Congress who do feel afraid about this legislation because the intelligence community, I think, has gone rogue. And I think there are some really, really bad elements to this intelligence community. And I think there are some people who are part of these committees who are afraid that they're compromised by the intelligence community. Maybe they've got some skeletons in their past, and they're afraid that they are compromised, that some of these details might come out, or maybe they could be threatened. So I think there's an element of that at play as well.
That's really important. And it's one of those things that is never discussed openly in public, not simply in the United States, but I think anywhere, is the extent of probable blackmail and other kinds of control exerted over people. I've heard the phrase control file being used more than once as a way to refer to how the intelligence community will control politicians. And so this is something that you think you have run into. I don't want you to put anybody on the spot here, but are you suggesting that you've actually uncovered, let's say, reason to believe that this is actively the case relating to this legislation, that there are members of Congress afraid of being blackmailed or being exposed in some way?
All I will say is, information that's already out there in the public. I think it's been said. I think it was Tucker Carlson or someone like that who basically said that a lot of these members of a lot of these politicians are actually quite scared of the intelligence community. Look, there are some really, really nasty factions of the intelligence community. We were warned before releasing the Office of Global Access story that there are some people who are not very nice and they're capable of very, very bad things if this story came to light. And I was also warned as well about the undersea retrieval program, which is one of the most tightly guarded secrets, basically, in terms of classification. That if you went public with any of the details, there are some really, really nasty people. And the best you could do if you report on these details is go public and be as public as possible. That's your best form of protection.
Mhm.
And there are other. I just don't think that Congress is fully aware of what's going on. I think a lot of these politicians, especially in the US, are going to fundraisers. They've got other things they're actually focused on, and that allows the deep state, basically, as some people would call it, to run free and do what they want. I've also been informed about, possibly retrievals of objects in space. If you search for it, there are ways that you could deorbit objects orbiting around the Earth. So what's to say that's not the case with UAP as well?
Deorbiting UAP, is that okay? So this is not something that I have really come across, and I want to ask about the undersea retrievals in a moment. But can you just expand on this idea of deorbiting UAP? It sounds like they. Am I wrong here? Attempting to take down an, let's say, alien craft that's in Earth orbit. How could they possibly do that unless they're shooting it down? Maybe is that what deorbiting a space-based UAP would be?
So the conversation has come up with one of my sources before about potentially retrieving objects from space, UAP from space, and from there, I can't source this saying that my sources have told me, but I've looked it up, and you can deorbit satellites, old satellites that you want to land back into Earth. So I can imagine that if you did have such a mission, it's come across like this is just my imagination here, okay? Maybe with a little bit of information from sources as well. So it's been explained to me that some UAP are brought down through dogfights. Like you see two UAPs and they're dogfighting each other, basically. So that could be one of the scenarios. It ends up as being deactivated so that you're able to deorbit it, or it could be potentially that I don't know, an EMP blast or some type like that to disable it. I don't know. It could be something like that. Right. But yeah, I would say that any such mission like that, you'd have to have the National Reconnaissance Office involved, Space Force, Space Command, and then obviously you'd have the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency involved as well, in terms of like, okay, where would this land? How do we track this now and recover it? So there'd be a lot of those elements involved, I can imagine. But obviously, this is just my imagination here. This is not from any sources at all, apart from the information about apparent dogfights. But otherwise, this is just me and my imagination going wild here of how it could work.
let me just say, I'm completing research on a fairly substantial USO project. And I have come across claims of dogfights among UAP in the 21st century that are one in particular that I'm thinking of was supported by at least 3 specific witnesses reporting separately to a particular website about it. I'll have all of that out at some point. The idea of UFOs or UAP dogfighting each other seems a little out there for people, but there have been a number of these, at least allegations, that are out there. So it's interesting that you're stumbling into this as well. Very interesting. Relating to the UAP legislation, I want to stick with that for a little longer, if you don't mind, and then move on to some other things that you've been researching. One thing I've noticed in terms of the opposition to this act, both last year and this year, seems to be dominated by members of the Republican Party. I can't think that they are the only opponents to this. The Democratic Party has its own deep connection to what we can call the deep state. But it nevertheless does seem to be the case. In your article, I was a bit surprised, but maybe I shouldn't be, that you had Rand Paul as one of the people giving resistance, and then you just said now that his staff has denied that. So that's, we don't really know. But have you gotten a sense of how? Can you give a more concrete sense of the resistance to this? Have you been able to get a handle on Is it, absolutely stemming from the contractors, or is it from the intelligence community, or these members of Congress just ideologically opposed? We were hinting that there might be some pressure exerted on these members of Congress. Can you just go into that a little bit more? Is there anything else you can say about this?
Sure. So firstly, just to address the Rand Paul point, and maybe give that a bit more context as well. In terms of that, I mean, I had spoken to one of my sources, and over the summer, that source told me that Senator Chris Coons, one of his members of staff, had told him that the resistance was coming from Rand Paul. So I had knowledge of it back then. And I think someone else also did say to me that actually it wasn't personal against the UAP stuff. He was just going out and opposing anything that was coming from Chuck Schumer that was supported from Schumer. So like more of a political thing. So who knows? And now I've been told that there's really, really good intelligence pointing to opposition from Senator Mitch McConnell as well. So
yeah.
It's difficult to piece it together. I'm not sure we'll ever definitively find out. But in terms of, I mean, so it seemed from last time in terms of resistance, it was coming from different places. So you had resistance from the Arrow, so that's the Defense Department, from Sean Kirkpatrick. There was likely resistance as well from the intelligence community, and then you had the defense contractors as well, allegedly, who were against it. Look, I think. So the way it works in terms of the Office of Global Access and a lot of these retrieval missions is they have their preferred contractors, so they have their Lockheed Martins, the Raytheons, BAE Systems perhaps as well. And then you've got your newer contractors who are new to the game. Some people suggested Radiance Technology. I think Danny put that out there, Danny Sheehan. So then you've got your new players to the game as well. And they're kind of like, actually, I want a bit of the action as well. Why does Lockheed get to have all the fun? Let's create our own connections to the CIA so that we can get access to some of these craft, or maybe let's see if we can do a transfer from Lockheed Martin to us, something like that. So then all of a sudden, when you get this eminent domain provision, it's kind of like, oh gosh, if that goes through, that means that this craft that we could potentially get our hands on, it could be ruined and all upset by this process. And also the added transparency on top of this as well. So, we could suddenly lose possession of this thing. So, I mean, that could come to play. Obviously, that's just speculation just coming from me. But I think that might play a part of it. And, I mean, it's come out recently in an interview between Lua Zondo and George Knapp about the, and it's been reported as well by George Knapp, Com Kelleher, and Lukatsky,
James Lukatsky,
yes, that's it. That they were, they were basically trying to get transfer of materials, let's say UAP materials, from Lockheed Martin, supported by, from my understanding, it was actually 2 vice presidents, perhaps, that were actually supportive and backing this kind of transfer going on to Bigelow's facility. And that was stopped by a very, very important person within the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology. A very, very powerful person.
I think we're getting closer to the real issue here. And I'm wondering if a lot of this, maybe not all of it, but if a lot of it, this is about who's going to get access to this exotic technology. Is that really what is happening? And you mentioned Robert Bigelow just now. I'm not the only one who's wondered about this, I'm sure, many times. Is this the play that's going on? Certain number of individuals who are prominent, who have their own connections, learned absolutely that, yes, there is such a program to acquire non-human alien technology and bodies, biologics, and they want a piece of it. They want a piece of the action. And I have been wondering, I mean, who can expect that everyone's motives are as pure as the driven snow? We like to think that actors out there are just doing this because they believe in it. They want the truth to come out to the public. And maybe they do. Maybe they want some of that truth out there. But isn't it at least as likely that they've got their own interest in this. And I've often wondered, access to the technology would certainly be a big motivator, and that would be Bigelow. And then you can imagine people at Lockheed thinking, who the hell is Bigelow thinking he can get into our game? And so goes the battle. Is that what you think you're seeing here, Chris?
I think Lockheed Martin is kind of like the US government. You know, there are many faces to it. You know, although there could be some, you know, important people within the organization, like those two vice presidents I was alluding to, who would be for the transfer. I think there would be others that would be against it.
Are you able to mention who these vice presidents are who have been involved in this? Is this not something that you can do? I don't want to put you on the spot here. If you can't, then don't. But
yeah, so I mean, one of the names has been put out there by Dolan in that interview. So that's James Ryder. So he was the vice president for space systems within Lockheed Martin. Actually, if you go and search it up on the web, you can see him. He's spoken at a conference before about UFOs. During the last years of his life, he was going to these spiritual conferences, talking about consciousness and spirituality in the electric universe. And it just made you think, you know, for someone from such a technical background who rose all the way to the top at Lockheed Martin, where they've got the most advanced technology and systems available to them, what led this person to suddenly become really, really interested in consciousness and spirituality? Like, what occurred? What has this person seen that's kind of like driven them down that path? That's the really, really curious thing for me to think about. So I just think that's really, really interesting. That, you know, I would say that. So I think some of the older materials may not actually. I think they may have been leased, let's say, to Lockheed Martin from the CIA, and maybe. Yeah, maybe that was brought to bear. You know, this isn't yours in the first place. Maybe that was brought to bear. But, you know, I think the threats that Jim Ryder got from that, I think they really scared him away, and they freaked him out. So he, yeah, and I think, you know, it was cumulative, because they tried to do the same thing with the Department of Homeland Security as well. The Homeland Security was trying to get this material as well, and that was stopped by the same person within the CIA. He is not a good influence, this person. It's not. And
is this a name that you know and you just can't say at the moment, or is this a name that you don't yet know?
It's a name that I don't want to say, and I believe some people do know the name, but I don't think they want to say it themselves, and I don't feel comfortable saying it. I think I've probably crossed the line already with my USO stuff. But yeah, like there are some really, really bad people out there, I would say. And look, when we did the Office of Global Access story as well, I'd note that there was actually like a warning that came on to Google when that story got released, saying that this is still a very new story. Don't trust everything that you see or something along those lines, because this is new information coming out. It was very, very rare that you got those warnings from Google. Well, I had never seen one before. But yeah, like I think with Google as well, you've got to look at the trust and safety team. A lot of the trust and safety team have formerly worked at the CIA. And obviously you've got a relationship between big tech and In-Q-Tel as well, which is the commercial arm of the CIA. So, you know, stuff like that does remind you that there are various ways that they could hurt you if they want, and threaten you. So they're immensely powerful, these people are.
I think you're doing, and let's mention Josh Boswell here again. And I think Matt Ford was one of the authors of your piece on the Office of Global Access. I think you're all doing very important work, and let's just put it out there, brave work in exposing some of this information. Can we talk a little bit about the Office of Global Access? This was a very important article that you were one of the key people writing it, along with Josh and Matt Ford. It's been discussed, you know, but it's also almost a year old. And I wonder how fresh it is with a lot of listeners. So would you mind just recapping that a little bit?
Yeah.
It's a very important piece of information, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, like it'd always been, looking at the UAP topic, you'd always ask the question about like the intelligence communities involved, and everyone was like, "Yeah, it's the CIA. The CIA is involved. They're the ones who have everything to do with retrievals, and they're keeping the secrets and stuff." But for me, I wanted to go into specifics, like whereabouts in the CIA.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's Directorate of Science and Technology, but which part? How does it work? If you're going to do a retrieval mission, how do they coordinate it? Who's involved? Who has the expertise? So, I was asking these questions, let's say, and I found some of the answers. I was provided a lot of information to search up upon, and I did research because the Office of Global Access name came up, and there was very, very little information about it on Google. But that's what I had. I had information that the Office of Global Access was involved in the retrieval program in contested territories, and that they were backed up by JSOC, so Joint Special Operations Command, which is basically the SEALs, Delta Force, all the elite forces within the armed services. And then I guess I didn't really have enough information, basically. So I knew that the CIA, obviously, like if something crashes in the Sudan or something like that, the US doesn't knock on the door of the embassy there and say, "Look, there's this craft, it's crashed, we don't know where it's from, can you please allow us access?" No way. And obviously, you've got the Russians after it as well. You've probably got the Chinese after it. So you basically need a network there. So you need the CIA, Directorate of Science, Technology, and the Office of Global Access working together with the clandestine elements within the Operations Directorate. And then you need logistics, and you need security from JSOC. So it's a real collaboration how it works. So I mean, what ended up is that I got Josh involved, and I got Matt involved, and we managed to get incredible corroboration from sources and some anecdotal information as well, in terms of something was recovered. It was really, really weird. I don't know what it was. I can't definitively say it was non-human, but it was definitely strange. So we got that kind of information. And like the USO retrieval program, these are programs that probably about 98% of the time they're dealing with Russian, Chinese, or some other origin which is earthly. But also they do come across stuff as well which is unknown origin, let's say. And I think they do hide behind unknown origin. So let's say that if you find something, okay, you don't want to know what it is, it's really, really advanced, but you can't definitively say it's not Russian, it's not Chinese, it's not British or whatever, so you could end up then getting that material and maybe biologics analyzed by contractors that are not government. They could probably come to a conclusion, and I don't know, maybe that gives the government some plausible deniability, saying we've not recovered anything of non-human origin because the government's not come to that conclusion. It might be defense contractors that have come to that conclusion in some cases. So yeah, that was so when that story came out, a lot of other people started coming out and saying, look, you hit the nail right on its head. A lot of people have come out saying that you really got it right, and a lot of people were freaking out when that story came out from within the CIA and within JSOC. So yeah, I think that story has aged well so far. But look, we can only do so much as journalists. It's up to Congress to actually stand up as well and take some risks. Why does it have to be me, Matt, and Josh taking the risks, to our families and to our lives? Why do we have to do it? I'm not even a US national, but it just seems unfair to me that we're showing some courage in terms of like finding out this information, but we're not being backed up by Congress.
This is the article that we're discussing here from last November of 2023 on the Daily Mail. I'll link that for viewers as well as your other articles. I just want them to be aware. I think it was a very important article. And if we look at that research plus now the latest article that you've just composed, it really isn't that difficult to see why we're seeing so much resistance to this, the UAP Disclosure Act, when we really put all of this together, we've got a operation that is managed, at least in large part, by the CIA or elements in the CIA, to recover foreign technology, including that of unknown origin, which presumably would be genuine UAP, alien craft. Can you just say that? So they recover those things. And in competition, this is a really good point you made, with other actors, whether they're Chinese or Russian or who knows who else would be interested in rushing to the scene of some exotic tech that comes down. Presumably, the US still might be in the best position to acquire this, but still it's competitive. And so you've, in that whole international context, you've got this going on. And then, of course, let's not forget the intrinsic value of this. And I mean monetary value as well as military and power value. It's perhaps incalculable. That is in the hands of CIA, but through its agencies, whoever contracts through it, who owns it, where are the lawyers, how do they work this out? You could easily see that this would be a nightmare scenario for those groups to relinquish control over this. It's really not that difficult. And it's, from my perspective, it's also maybe not that difficult to see why there would be a lot of fear and threats and potentially blackmail and the rest involved in this. I mean, I don't know. That's what it looks like to me.
But look, you could make the argument that it's good for national security as well to open this up to some extent, because you got autocratic nations, China and Russia, who are the main competitors here, and because they're authoritarian nations, in China's case, it's a police state. They could very, very easily have a much bigger kind of reverse engineering program and keep it very, very secretive, and hush it up and put much more resources into it. Whereas in the US, it's much difficult. You can only get a limited number of people to actually work on these reverse engineering projects. If you smoked the wrong thing, when you were 16 years old, and that's your record, you may be the best engineer or scientist in the world when you're 30 years old, but there's no way you are getting access to this program, because it's so restrictive. And I think there are people within these defense contractors who do understand that it's a big problem. And also, you could make the case as well that by actually making elements of this public to some extent, you could also attract a lot more talent to those industries. A lot of the best talent now is going to SpaceX and other Silicon Valley businesses. Who wants to wait years and years to get a clearance and do nothing basically until they can actually get access to the really exciting stuff within Lockheed. So there are both sides you can play in terms of national security. And look, if the Chinese or Russians manage to kind of harness this technology to the fullest extent, it's game over, because UFOs seem to be able to track nuclear assets wherever they are, whether it be nuclear silos, whether it be submarines or any other objects that runs on nuclear propulsion or has nuclear weapons. All of a sudden, if you can master that technology, all of a sudden the US nuclear deterrent in submarines is rendered meaningless, because you've got that technology that can seek out and know where these kinds of objects are straight away. So yeah, that's a big risk.
Yeah, this is where we're getting into some serious geostrategic rivalries.
Yeah.
As far as who the good guys are in all of this, I'm going to back out of that at this time. I think most Western people are inundated with 1000% Western-based propaganda. We'll come back to that another time. But the fact is that there are these competing interests, and that definitely complicates matters without a doubt. Without a doubt. In the time remaining, we've got some time here. I wonder, are we able to talk about any USO or water-based elements to this. I know you have been researching it. I know that last summer, just a few months ago, you and Josh did a piece on some new revelations concerning the 2004 Nimitz UFO incident, dealing with witness claims about an object being tracked on sonar underwater, moving at exceptional speed. I think this would be of interest to many of us. I don't know how much attention this article got when it came out. I think it's important, and I wonder if you might be able to discuss a little bit about it.
Absolutely, yeah. So when it seemed as though the UAPDA had failed again, I felt quite emotional. And I've been sitting on information for a long time. As you know, we discussed it during the summer. And the longer that you hold on to information, the more risk it can put you at until you go public with that information. So I decided, look, I'm gonna put some details up there in the article of the undersea retrievals program. But then after I put the information out there and published it, I kind of I got nervous and I removed the details. I regretted it. I thought, no, I'm not putting this out. But then someone had basically gone on X, gone on to Wayback Machine. I don't know if they were given a tip off or something. They'd obviously known about it somewhere, and they saw the details I originally published on there, and basically publicized them on X. And it was kind of like a catch and kill thing. They were trying to make the allegations look ridiculous. So I thought, okay, screw this. I'm going to republish details in the article, and I'm going to go all out. I'm going to go even more detailed because I do trust the origin of where this information comes from. And I could also add as well, since the information has been published, people who would usually call BS on this kind of stuff haven't commented. They've been completely silent. Yeah, as I said, this is really, really classified stuff, apparently. But yeah, all I can say is that all the names out there that I mentioned are not classified. It's information out there in the public domain. All I'm doing is, through the information I've been given, is just laying out how it works. So you've got, there is a program like the Office of Global Access. It's not just kind of USOs, it's other things in the sea as well that they recover. But essentially, it's basically it's something that's kind of coordinated by US operations. US Special Operations Command, and essentially what happens is the National Underwater Reconnaissance Office, which, from my understanding, was previously run by Bobby Ray Inman and John Warner. That's kind of in charge of tracking these objects and providing a location of where they are if they do end up needing retrieval. And what happens then is that the CIA will get involved in terms of its so it's got a maritime branch within the CIA Operations Directorate. So those guys would then get involved along with the US Special Operations Command and its assets. And then submersibles are provided by the Woods Hole Institute, I believe its name is.
Yeah,
so they provide
Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. I believe it is, right? Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, and then they provide the submersibles. Although it's also been said to me that Lockheed Martin have now developed their own submersibles that are capable of undertaking these missions as well.
I want to stop you right here. So this was not what I was actually asking about, but I'm glad that you've gone in this direction.
Sure.
I was originally thinking of your piece from August dealing with the Nimitz encounter and the tracking of a very high-speed, fast mover under the water. But let's put that aside. This is a USO retrieval operation that you're talking about, and I don't have that article of yours. So I'm going to need you to give me a link for that so that we can all read it. And,
so that was actually including my last article. So when you saw it initially, those sections were taken out.
Oh, I see.
I've only just reinserted those sections. I didn't want to do a whole article about it because I wanted to get the information out so it was there for the relevant people. But
thank you. So I appreciate that. So you're fleshing out. Really, this is from jumping off of the research you did published last November about retrievals and adding a underwater aspect to it. And so can you just flesh this out a little bit more then? And I apologize for interrupting your narrative.
No, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, and then from my understanding, what then happens is the Office of Naval Research will then be tasked with providing it to the military contractors, the defense contractors, to actually do the analysis of the craft. And from my understanding as well, that whenever there's nuclear materials involved as well, those get taken to the national labs, from the Department of Energy national labs.
So nuclear materials with UAP under the water, could these be Russian or Chinese or some other American?
Yeah, nuclear materials get taken to the national labs.
Would they necessarily be of non-human origin, or are we just talking about all types of craft?
All types of craft.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's a really, really important aspect as well. And the Department of Energy has it has power to classify materials, even if they're not nuclear materials, from my understanding. So it has a lot of power as well to make this stuff stay classified. So yeah, that's how it works. And if you search for the Office of Naval Research, you see that they have facilities dotted all around the globe, and that's the ones that we know in public. But it seems to me that they're perfectly placed to kind of like help coordinate, get these out to the relevant contractors. So yeah, I mean, again, from my perspective, it kind of like makes sense. You'd need a different setup to retrieve craft from under the ocean as opposed to on land. And obviously, like I said, there could be a different setup when it comes to retrieving stuff from space as well. So yeah, that's from my broader understanding how it works. And my only wish is that Congress follows up with this stuff, because there's no point in me doing it as a journalist just for the public to find out if Congress isn't going to actually use that information as well and do their own follow-ups.
Well, it's good that you come back to Congress here, and this might be a good way to kind of bring this full circle. I've spoken to one or two folks who've got some connection with all of that, and I have not heard anyone either have confidence that Congress is really going to be able to do much with this. It seems, I know earlier you said that there might be a glimmer of hope for the UAP Disclosure Act to pass, but you didn't seem very confident, and I have not spoken to anyone who had any confidence either. I think most people seem to think this is dead in the water at this time. Maybe we're wrong. Maybe it will get somehow snuck into the manager's package, but it doesn't look like it. If that is so, do you have any sense of how this might go moving forward next year? Will Congress be able to get on top of this, or is Congress done and this now goes down to the executive branch, the office of the president? Is that the way to go? I don't know if you've gotten any feelers out there that have given you information on this aspect of it.
Yeah, really, really good question, actually. I think in terms of the glimmer of hope, the best case scenario is that, obviously it's on the public record now that there are going to be 2 public hearings in Congress on UAP, one from Kirsten Gillibrand, which will likely involve the new director of the Arrow, which I think is Dr. John Kozlowski.
Yeah.
And then the second one will be with retired Admiral Tim Gallaudet. But I think there might be more as well in that one, and that's going to be a House-led one from Nancy Mace.
Yeah.
I think if you get some bombshell kind of like explosive revelations from any of those hearings, that could potentially force the hand of Congress to airdrop this UAPDA within the National Defense Authorization Act. So that could be a bit of hope, because the pressure could grow so much for them to do something, for them to act. Or like you said as well, it could come from the president. So we know that Kamala Harris used to be within the Senate's Intelligence Committee. From my understanding, she was there at the time when the UAP task force was being formed. So she may have actually been there when whistleblowers were coming forwards as well. So
Mm.
I think that's important to remember if Harris wins. And then obviously we've got Donald Trump's team. You know, there are rumors that some really big players like Marco Rubio are going to get key positions within a new Trump administration. There was another guy, Rishaswamy is his name. I can't remember his first name again, but he ran to be the Republican candidate for presidency, and he actually got quite far. Actually,
you're talking about Vivek?
That's it, Vivek. Yeah, that's
yeah,
it.
exactly.
So when the UAPDA was gutted last year, he actually retweeted my article on X about it. And you know, he's previously said before that, you know, he's
extremely intelligent man. He's extremely intelligent man.
Absolutely. And look, you know, if you've got Donald Trump surrounded by those kinds of people, and you know, Donald Trump Jr. recently interviewed Lou Elizondo as well. So I think you could see, you know, bright sides to both Harris and Donald Trump presidency. Perhaps there is hope in both on both sides, whatever way it may go in November. I tried to be very, very bipartisan about it, being English, and you know, so I tried to stay out of like the political stuff. And yeah, but you know, if I'm trying to be balanced, that's that's what I want to say in terms of that. But yeah, I think that's a really, really good scenario to throw up in terms of presidential intervention.
It would be very interesting. I hadn't remembered about Harris's connection to the Senate Intelligence Committee, but the timing would have been perfect. So she was back in 2019 and into 2020. She was still a senator with all of that. But you're talking about two different totally types of candidates and totally different types probably of presidencies, but each would have their own interesting potential drama. So that would be interesting to follow. I agree. Whether or not the executive branch would actually do anything is a whole other topic that we will have to come back to. And perhaps for that, we'll invite Josh as well, whose work I like very much also. Fascinating subject. I really would like to have you come back on again in the next few months, Chris, because this is a topic where I think we really need good journalists like yourself who have gone inside. You're talking to the right people, and you're getting information that the rest of us want. So I definitely want listeners to check out your articles. Again, I will have them linked below. And do you have any? Actually, let me ask you about the hearings that are coming up. So the particular, the one that I've been reading about for November 13th, that's led by Representative Mace. Any thoughts on how successful you think either of these hearings coming up will be, and will they? Do you think that there's a potential that they can kind of kickstart legislation moving forward? Are you aware of any of the witnesses that may be asked to come forward? Do you have a sense about that? Any of that?
Yeah, sure. So best case scenario for the Kirsten Gillibrand hearing within the Senate. So we have heard, I think most recently actually, from Chris Mellon, the new director of Arrow, is a breath of fresh air. And he may diverge from the path that Sean Kirkpatrick set out. So that could be good. So we need to find out if we can get some positive suggestions from him in terms of what way he's taking the Arrow, and maybe some admissions as well that some of these objects cannot be explained, which is true. And then in terms of the House hearing, So all I can say is that I've known about the hearings for a long, long time now, planned within the House, and a lot of people who are kind of involved in helping organize that. They're very, very excited. I'm very, very excited to hear the details. I think, you know, what comes to my mind is that you've got to be very, very careful, especially if you're putting out whistleblowers and witnesses to testify, because if you actually name them too far in advance, then there is the opportunity to threaten them and actually scare them off of doing it and participating in the hearings. But I think that, hopefully if all goes to plan, that hearing within the House, it could be potentially very, very explosive. And that's my great hope at the moment. And if that does occur, then I think we can get set for a very, very exciting roller coaster to finish the year, hopefully.
Yeah, we shall see. The hearings, I agree with you. I think they're probably the best hope among proponents of transparency to move the needle a little bit. So perhaps that can be the case. Last thing, you mentioned whistleblowers and threats and so on. And I know that one of the key elements in the UAP Disclosure Act, which just got excluded, was whistleblower protection. And that's absolutely necessary. We all recognize that if someone wants to come forward now as a whistleblower, they could be relieved of their work. They lose their salary, and then if all goes well in the future, they may get recompensed. But in the meantime, they've got a very difficult and uncertain time. But even if that were to be amended and fixed, would that really deal with the behind-the-scenes threats and blackmail and the dark stuff that never gets discussed? I'm sure it wouldn't. And it just shows to me that we are dealing with a very, very difficult and dangerous group of people potentially when we're dealing with the UAP UFO topic.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's really, really difficult, especially as a journalist, because you never know what detail is crossing the line too much, and there's always a dance that you have to do while releasing details of the story, which is why I chose to put the undersea retrieval program in my last article the way that I did it, because there's always a dance, and you don't want to cross the line too much when it comes to that stuff sometimes. And obviously with the Office of Global Access story, that was easier because it had 3 authors. And it exploded in the worldwide press.
No one did.
It's too public, So it's always a dance. It's tough.
Are you working on more articles, I hope?
Yes. Yes, there are some other interesting articles that we are working on for both Liberation Times and the Daily Mail. And hopefully they provide some extra boost, let's say, to proceedings in Congress. But it's all about getting over the line in Congress,
Yeah.
That's what we need to address. We need political courage here. That's what we need.
Well, your work is very important, and I'm so glad that we had an opportunity to bring you on here so that other people can know about what you're doing. Christopher Sharp, where are you, in London?
Yes, London, correct.
Yeah, lovely. Well, I'm very glad that you came on here. Again, I'll have links. Any other links that you want to give me, just pop them over and I'll make sure they go below. And I want to thank you for being on for this last hour on the program.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Richard.
Mine as well. I want to thank everyone for sticking around with us, with Chris and myself, for this fascinating discussion. If you like this video, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, share, please. If you like what I do, go to my website, Richard Dolan Members, where I do this all the time. We've got a great community of members there as well. And it's a lot of fun. So that's it. I want to thank everyone for being here with me. I'm Richard Dolan. Catch you next time. Let's keep fighting the good fight. Later.